Year 9 and welcome to the third poem in the Power and Conflict cluster. This week we're going to be looking at the poem Remains by Simon Armitage. Make sure you've got some pen and paper to make some notes. A couple of times during the course of the clip I'll ask you to pause the video to complete a task. Let's get started. The first thing I want us to think about is the connotations of the title. Connotations means the ideas that it puts in your mind, what it makes you think of. So if I say the word remains to you, which words does it make you think of? Pause the clip now and write down 5 words that the title suggests to you. Some of the ideas that you might have thought of are on this slide. The word remains has several meanings or connotations. It is often used to refer to what is left of a human body after death. In this case, the brutally injured corpse of the looter. It could also refer to the guilt and remorse felt by the soldier, which remains long after the event and haunts his dreams every time he closes his eyes. Perhaps it refers to the remains of the soldier, suggesting that he is changed as a result of his experiences and is only a shell of a man he was before he went to war. Let's think about the context of the poem now. It's important that when you're writing about poetry, you write about the context as well. So Simon Armitage, who wrote this poem, is from Yorkshire, and often in his poetry we see a very colloquial or conversational style to his writing. He doesn't just write poetry though. He has written works for television also. Armitage made a film for Channel 4 in 2007 called The Not Dead. He has a collection of poems of the same name, and this poem, Remains, was from this collection. To prepare for this, he interviewed soldiers from different wars, including the Gulf War. The reference in this poem to desert sands suggests that it reflects the experience of soldiers in the Gulf War. What is post-traumatic stress? Simon Armitage based this poem on the idea of post-traumatic stress, sometimes referred to as PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder caused by very stressful, frightening or distressing events. The type of events that can cause PTSD include serious road accidents, violent personal assaults, violence or severe neglect, witnessing a violent death, military combat, being held hostage, terrorist attacks, natural disasters such as severe floods, earthquakes or tsunamis. PTSD can develop immediately after someone's experiences, or it can take weeks or months or even years later to develop. PTSD is estimated to affect about 1 in every 3 people who have a traumatic experience. Someone with PTSD will often relive the traumatic event through nightmares or flashbacks and may experience feelings of isolation, irritability and guilt. They may also have problems sleeping, such as insomnia and finding concentrating difficult. These symptoms are often severe and persistent enough to have a significant and often extremely damaging impact on the person's day-to-day life. Simon Armitage said about this group of poems, The Not Dead, that these are poems of survivors, the damaged, exhausted men who return from war in body but never wholly in mind. So I think that tells us a lot about what type of poem this is going to be. Those perhaps suffering from PTSD. What is this poem about? This poem is written from the perspective of a soldier stationed perhaps in Iraq or Afghanistan or any war zone really. They are on patrol and fire on some bank robbers. One of the looters appears to possibly have a gun, but they don't know this for definite. They open fire. The second half of the poem focuses on the fact that the soldier, even long after this event, cannot escape the memory. He cannot leave it behind. And he carries the image of the dead man with him in his mind. A soldier perhaps suffering from the effects of PTSD. On this slide, we've got a cartoon illustration of the poem. Perhaps pause the clip here and have a look in more detail of what it's displaying and showing that happens during the course of the poem. Remains by Simon Armitage. On another occasion, we got sent out to tackle looters raiding a bank, and one of them legs it up the road, probably armed, possibly not. Well, myself and somebody else are all of the same mind, so all three of us open fire. Three of a kind all let him fly, and I swear I see every round as it rips through his life. I see broad daylight on the other side. So we've hit this looter a dozen times, and he's there on the ground, sort of inside out. Pain itself, the image of agony. One of my mates goes by and tosses his guts back into his body. Then he's carted off in the back of a lorry. End of story, except not really. His blood shadow stays on the street, and out on patrol I walk right over it week after week. Then I'm home on leave, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank. Sleep, and he's probably armed and possibly not. Dream, and he's torn apart by a dozen rounds, and the drink and the drugs won't flush him out. He's here in my head when I close my eyes, dug in behind enemy lines, not left for dead in some distant, sun-stunned, sand-smothered land, or 6 feet under in desert sand, but near to the knuckle here and now, his bloody life in my bloody hands. Have a look at some of the vocabulary from the poem on this slide. Your task is to match up the words to their definition. Perhaps pause the clip here while you complete this task. Here are the answers to the match-up task. Pause the clip again while you check your answers. Now we're going to focus on the language in the poem and the techniques the writer uses. As I mentioned earlier, the poem contains a great deal of colloquial language, such as legs it up the road and one of my mates. This helps to create an authentic voice, implying that this could happen to any soldier. The colloquialisms, along with the use of the present tense, also create quite an intimate relationship with the reader, as though the speaker is addressing a friend. It sounds as if he is talking to us. There is quite a casual tone to some of the poem, such as tosses his guts back into his body. The verb tosses suggests indifference or detachment, implying that the soldiers are used to dealing with death. There is a lack of emotion here for what has happened. There is also a lack of respect for how they deal with the body. It is simply thrown in the back of the cart. There isn't any remorse shown here. His body is simply disposed of. The use of present tense also helps convey a sense of immediacy for the reader. It puts us at the scene. The fact that the soldiers who shoot alongside the speaker are referred to as somebody else and somebody else reinforces this idea of the ordinary soldier experiencing life-changing events in the course of a day's work. The details aren't important because it is just another day like any other. The use of passive voice at the start of the poem, "We got sent out," reveals that they are soldiers who are just simply following orders, and they're at the mercy of their superiors who decide what they need to do. It also serves to distance the soldier somewhat from his actions, suggesting that shooting the looter was not his decision. It was something he was ordered to do. The poem contains a lot of violent, graphic imagery. For instance, the metaphor of the bullet ripping through the man's life and body so that the soldier can see broad daylight through his bullet wounds is particularly shocking and disturbing. The image of the looter on the floor, sort of inside out, is equally dramatic. We are, however, left in no doubt that this is a traumatic sight and one that will stay with the speaker forever. It encourages the reader to view war as a particularly unpleasant experience, but one that becomes dangerously routine over time. The repetition of the line, probably armed, possibly not, betrays the speaker's lingering doubts. He is tortured by the fact that the looter may not have been a threat and has difficulty justifying the killing of a potentially unarmed man. Armitage also uses alliteration, but I blink and he bursts again through the doors of the bank, to emphasise the speaker's feelings of guilt. The repetition of the plosive be lends a punch to these memories as they almost pierce the conscience of the soldier and disrupt his sleep. Two metaphors are used towards the end of the poem to show the soldier's guilt. The one is, his blood shadow stays on the street, and the other is, and the guilt and the drugs won't flush him out. These show he is unable to escape the memory. The blood is a stain that is always with him. They highlight the haunting effect of the looter's death and the effect that it has upon the speaker. He is unable to escape and in his desperation turns to drink and drugs, but they don't help. Now let's think about the way the poem is structured. The poem is written as a first-person monologue. The soldier is the speaker. The poem is structured into 8 stanzas, the first 7 of which contain 4 lines, and the last one only 2. The shorter last stanza leaves the reader in no doubt that this soldier is not likely to recover from the mental effects of his experiences anytime soon. The focus of the first 4 stanzas is on the actual shooting, and the final 4 portray the ensuing mental torture of the soldier when he returns home. There is a volta, which is a turning point in the poem, which is at the line, end of story, except not really. The lack of regular rhyme or rhythm, along with the use of enjambment, help to create a sense of natural speech. It sounds conversational. The opening phrase, on another occasion, also suggests that this was not an isolated incident, but one of many faced by the soldier on a daily basis. The irregular line lengths and varied sentence lengths also imply an erratic chain of thought. The short sentences in stanza 6 signify interrupted sleep. The faster-paced rhythm of the long final sentence portrays the disintegration of the speaker's mind and thought processes, and he seems to be increasingly more anxious and agitated by his guilt-laden flashbacks. A list of key themes here on this slide. In this poem, we see the impact that war can have on people, long-term effects that they cannot escape, suffering of PTSD. There is a sense of power when the soldiers choose who lives and who dies, but there is an overwhelming lack of power here. He has no control over his memories or his guilt for what has happened. He is helpless. Just to finish with, a writing task based on the poem where you produce a creative piece of writing on the events of the poem using the key phrases listed here. So the key phrases that I'd like you to include are probably armed, possibly not, all of the same mind, it rips through his life, sort of inside out, the image of agony, and tosses his guts back into his body. Here is an example of the writing task, which I'll just read to you now. A wave of uncertainty swept through me as I raised my arm, focusing my sights on the figure racing up the road. All that was in my mind was he was probably armed, but possibly not. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my fellow soldiers lift their guns, and as if I was a machine acting without thinking, I felt the trigger being squeezed by my fingers. As the bullet left the barrel, the force pushed me backwards, as if trying to push me away from the scene of devastation that was about to appear before me. In slow motion, I watched the bullet pirouette its way through the air and witnessed it forcing its way through the flesh of the running man, tearing his skin and revealing his guts, turning him sort of inside out. It ripped through his life, it ripped through his soul, it ripped through my soul. I watched his body slowly crumple and fall to the waiting pavement below. So have a go at this writing task and send it to Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Grant, Mr. Layton or Miss Bannister via email when you've completed it. Thank you for listening, Year 9, and hopefully you've made some detailed notes while listening. Remember that you can go back and re-watch the clip to add to your notes if you need to. I will see you all on Wednesday for the next Q&A session on This Poem Remains. Thank you again.